Welcome back, MTN Giants podcast, reacting to the final Hard Knocks Giants episode 5 of 5. I reacted to all of them, and it was a pretty good series for the most part. I think we got a pretty good amount of information from this. Coming into it, I really had no idea. I don't think anybody knew because this was the first time they did like the off-season version of Hard Knocks. And I think for the most part, a lot of people who did watch this were surprised about how much information actually got out and thought it'd probably be more vanilla than it really was. So it was cool seeing a lot of the stuff that's in depth, and I learned a lot of things. You know, I've been watching football since probably 05, 06, closing in on 20 years now, and I just learned a lot. Even tonight, there was something, this might just be a Giants thing, but I had no idea that after the draft's over, that the general manager, which was Joe Schoen, of course, he brought in all of his scouts and gave them pretty much a yearly review of, I thought you did this well this year, maybe work on this, and, you know, possibly helping with connections and where these people want to go with their careers. There were cool things like that. So we're going to react to this episode. Admittedly, this was not the most exciting episode. They were kind of just wrapping things up. They were showing guys getting drafted. There were some trade offers and other possible draft stuff or scenarios that played out that they showed us behind the scenes, and some possible positions the Giants wanted, some possible players the Giants wanted that went before they got picked. So we'll touch on that stuff. Hope you guys enjoy. Leave a like and let's get into it. So one of the more important things we learned from this was that the Colts and the Jets were trying to trade up on the first day of draft night, round 1, to try and trade up to 6 overall. Now, they only showed the Jets calling, but not an offer. So we don't know if Joe Douglas and the Jets made an offer. We know they called. Don't really think the talks got anywhere close to anything, really, based on what they showed. But the Colts and Chris Ballard had an offer that was the number 15 overall pick, the 46th overall pick, so a first and second in this year's draft, and a 2025 second-round pick to move up to 6. Now, personally, I think the only thing that maybe would have made them really think was if that 2025 second was a 2025 first. That's the only way I believe that Joe Schoen would have really sat there and gave it some real thought. But based on that offer, it's not a horrible offer. It's not. But going from 6 to 15 is no joke, right? I mean, it's a lot of spots in the first round, basically. You're basically going from the top 6 to going to the middle of the draft, and it's like that's a lot. So to only gain a second round pick, which would have been nice because the Giants only had 6 picks, and then a second round pick the next year, and I'm a person that believes the Colts are going to be pretty good next year, so I don't expect that second round pick to be like 34 overall or 36. It's probably going to be somewhere in the 40s, late 40s, something like that. So I don't blame Joe Schoen at all for declining that offer, but I will give him credit because the previous general manager, who will not be named, that jackass was known for not picking up the phone at all on the draft night of 2018 when the Giants had the second overall pick. So to see that our general manager now is responsible enough, and they knew at that pick, they were 99% sure they were going to take Neighbors. They knew it. But there is no harm in picking up the damn phone and listening to offers from other GMs. That's why when I heard about that with Gettleman from 2018, I couldn't believe that A, he was still the GM, and B, that he was just that dense as a person, and it's just irresponsible not to pick up the phone. So especially with a second overall pick, and it was a draft where 4 quarterbacks went in the top 10, right? I think Rosen got in there, right? So yeah, I mean, that just pisses me off. I know I'm going back 6 years, but I still can't get over it. Anyway, so the Jets offered too. We don't know what it was. In a separate interview, I guess this was after the draft, kind of just on cameras for the show, Joe Schoen brought up how the APY, basically talking about contract numbers for receivers, is very high these days. And I want to see who the highest paid wide receivers in football are, because we saw Justin Jefferson got paid this offseason. Tyreek Hill, I think, got paid kind of recently as well. And then there's guys like Brandon Ayuk and guys like T. Higgins that want big deals. So, wow. All right. So, $35 million APY is what Justin Jefferson's getting. I mean, that's insane. Like, Daniel Jones, who is a quarterback, of course, is only making $5 million per year more APY than Justin Jefferson. Obviously, Jefferson is just this all-world talent, and he's great. The guy was putting up great numbers with Nick Mullins last year. But still, even like A.J. Brown, 32 mil. Amon-Ra St. Brown, 30. Tyreek Hill's at 30. Jalen Waddle's at 28. To have two receivers on your team taking up that much money APY, I mean, that is $58 million APY for two receivers on the same team. I mean, that's just crazy. I mean, the Dolphins make it work. If you watch my recent Dolphins video, I'm a little skeptical about them, but still, they have two elite receivers, and they just extended Tua, which, once again, I don't necessarily agree with, but there was really nothing else they can do. But anyway, so they talked about that. In the second round, they definitely showed us who they wanted, which was also pretty interesting. So the names they brought up were Kool-Aid McKinstry, who was brought up as a teaser at the end of episode number 4. So I think we kind of knew that coming in, that they were thinking about taking Kool-Aid McKinstry, who I forgot went before the Giants picked, but he went to Tampa, I believe. And then there was the pick for Kamari Lassiter, who went to Houston. That's the one we learned today. So Kamari Lassiter was a guy that the Giants had on their board, and it seems like if he was still there when the Giants picked, which was their, trying to see what overall pick this was now, 47 overall. So 47 overall. If he was still there, Kamari Lassiter or Kool-Aid McKinstry, two guys who ironically went back-to-back at 41 and 42. The Giants, of course, picked 47. So they missed on him by about 5-6 picks. So if those two guys were there, it seemed like they would have been Giants. The Giants had a quote, Joe Schoen specifically, about cornerback being their number one need going into day 2. And they eventually addressed it in round 3 with Andrew Phillips, who's more of a nickel corner. They said he can do both, but I think we know he's going to be more of a nickel corner. But it did seem like they really wanted an outside corner on day 2. Just unfortunately for them, the guys they wanted were just a little bit out of their reach. And we'll see if Lassiter or if Kool-Aid McKinstry end up having great careers, and maybe we'll look back on that and say, damn, they were so close to getting those guys, but hopefully not. I do like Tyler Nubin a lot. He should be fine. Seems like a great leader, instinctual player, durable, tons of experience. Like, he's going to be one of those guys who hopefully is here for a long time and just a leader of this defense, so no problem with that pick at all. Speaking of Nubin, so they showed 7 hours before the start of day 2, the Giants and their front office were going over different scenarios, and they basically said if those two corners were gone, which was Lassiter and Kool-Aid McKinstry once again, if those two guys were gone, they were going to take Tyler Nubin. So that was their plan all along. They had a plan A, a plan B, a plan C, probably a plan D, and even more. So they got the plan C, and Tyler Nubin was that guy. Shane Bowen was apparently a pretty big fan of Tyler Nubin. Joe Schoen said to Shane Bowen, he's your number one guy, right? And then Shane Bowen said yes. So they ended up taking him. Andrew Phillips is viewed as a 3-down corner by Joe Schoen based on what he said in this. He was the last corner we'd be fired up about getting. So it seemed like Andrew Phillips was like the last corner in his tier, quote unquote, if you want to call it a tier, that the Giants were comfortable taking at that point in the draft. And like, as I said, they really wanted a corner. They made it happen. And Andrew Phillips so far in camp has been really good, apparently. Pick number 70 overall. And, you know, I think slot corner, especially in this type of defense and just how the NFL has been trending for the past 5-6 years, slot corner is very important. So if Andrew Phillips comes in here and is a solid starting nickel corner from day 1, it's going to be a great pick. So I have no problem with that at all. They liked him at the Senior Bowl. Joe Schoen thought he definitely upped his draft value there. They asked him in a sit-down interview, what's his number one trait? And Phillips said it was his toughness. He says, I ain't scared of nobody on that field, which I do like hearing. He's not the biggest guy, of course. I want to see what he's listed at. Definitely below 6 feet tall. I think he's like 5. He's 5'11". Wow, all right. So more than I thought, but 5'11", 190. As I said, they do view him as a guy that can play inside and outside and play on all 3 downs. So they're not looking at this as a just a slot corner, a guy that's going to play on third down. Like, this is an every down player that they plan to play probably everywhere. In the 4th round pick, the Theo Johnson pick, which was probably my favorite pick of the draft. I mean, I did love Malik Neighbors as well, of course, and I did like Tyler Nubin, but just because Theo Johnson was one of those guys that I had my eye on. I made a video a couple weeks before the draft about just my overall draft, I guess, sleepers, quote unquote, or just guys I really liked that not many people were that crazy about. And Theo Johnson was on that list for me. They talked about his size, his explosiveness, speed, all those things that were rare for him. And Joe Shane got a text from somebody. They didn't say who it was. I might have just missed that part, so that could be my fault. But Joe Shane was reading a text message about Theo Johnson, and the text said, he's a straight dog, had him at the Senior Bowl, never turned down a rep at practice, and just the fact that he has an edge to him. He's respectable, but not afraid to scrap. And then Theo Johnson said on the phone call after being drafted, you won't regret this. You're going to get everything out of me. And I don't know, I just like that. I just like that reassurance from draft prospects. I mean, I'll never be a GM, of course, but like just hearing that from like a guy who just drafted, like, you're not going to regret this. Like, I do like that. There's something about that where it's like, it's just talk and it's just words, and actions mean way more, and it's going to have to play itself out. But I just like hearing that from a prospect. You're not going to regret this. I mean, I'm sure there's a long list of draft prospects that have said you're not going to regret this, and the teams, in fact, did regret it. But there's just something about it. I don't know. It just could be me. The analytics department raved about Tyrone Tracy's explosiveness per touch. That was what they said. I mean, you think about what the hell does the analytics department do? And it's like things like that, because I think even we saw that as fans on Twitter. It was like we would see these tweets about, or X, whatever it's called, but we would see these posts about how Tyrone Tracy was one of the most elusive and explosive backs in the entire class. And then you had the Giants analytics people saying the exact same thing. So it was good to see that, of course. And Brendan Brown talked about him for a bit, and they talked about the position change and how he could be a bit overlooked. So I really hope he works out. I would like Tyrone Tracy. I said this on draft night, or the night he was drafted. I would like to see him as the RB2. I know I don't really love Eric Gray or anybody else. I mean, who are the backup running backs at this point? So Eric Gray, Tyrone Tracy, Joshua Corbin. Like, it's just none of those guys really interest me. Tyrone Tracy does. So I hope it is Tyrone Tracy when the regular season begins. But I get it if he's not. But I don't know. This running back room's not that exciting. Singletary is just the definition of an average starter. Hopefully he makes some plays and looks good, but I would like to see Tyrone Tracy play. I really would. Towards the end, that was pretty much the last bit of information that meant anything. There was the clips of Joe Shane and Brian Dable's wives at Tommy's Tavern getting along, so that's nice to see. They had this family party after the draft, and it's pretty cool to do that because I'm sure like most teams do it, but it's just nice because I'm sure the weeks leading up to the draft, I'm sure Joe Shane and all these front office people are just so focused on what's going on at that building that like they just barely have any time to spend with family. So to have like this big draft party after, it's like kind of cool just to get everybody together and celebrate like what you've been working for months to do for, it's a 3-night thing. And they work so hard at researching every prospect and making sure they turn over every stone, every rock, whatever. So it was good to see that. And as I mentioned, they do reviews from Joe Shane. So Joe Shane, as I mentioned in the beginning, reviewed every prospect or every scout, I meant to say. I'm sure they review every prospect, but he reviews every scout face-to-face in his office. I had no idea they did that. So, as I said, there were things from this series that I just didn't know they did. I thought when Joe Shane did the media presser at the Combine, and they did like a rehearsal behind the scenes before that media interview, and they would have the Giants front office people asking Joe Shanes, pretending they were the press. Like, that was pretty cool as well. Like, I really thought, like, maybe I was naive for thinking that, but I just thought that Joe Shane would just go up there and wing it. But they really just, like, were asking him questions behind the scene, like, hey, do you plan on franchise tagging Saquon Barkley? Do you guys plan on getting a quarterback in the first round? Like, just questions that were going to be asked. And it's better to be prepared. I can say that from experience of whether it's preparing for a public speech or whatever. Like, it's much better to go in prepared. So it's no surprise that they do it, but, like, I just never thought about it to that degree. So anyway, we did learn some cool stuff in this series. I'm trying to think, like, what is, like, the coolest thing I learned from this series? I think the Saquon stuff was interesting. Just the fact that on the day of free agency, the first day of free agency, they were pretty much out for a while. Like, they signed their 2 offensive linemen on day 1, and once they heard the Saquon price, they were kind of like, yeah, we're out. Like, they didn't really make him an offer on the first day of free agency, from what it seemed like. They gave Joe Shane, Saquon's agent gave Joe Shane the numbers. He thought about it, and I think they just got back to him and said, yeah, we're out. Like, we can't do this. So, I don't have any hatred towards Saquon Barkley. Like, I think it's kind of funny at this point to kind of just, like, bust the guy's balls on Twitter, and I know a lot of other fans do that too. But yeah, really, it doesn't matter to me. It's a 27-year-old back. He wasn't going to do much here, of course, because this team is probably not going to win that many games next year. They're definitely not Super Bowl contenders. Could they F around and win a playoff game in a great matchup? Maybe, but, we got our luck with that 2 years ago. So to bank on that again, it's just not really worth thinking about. But anyway, I'll talk about training camp for a bit and what we've seen. It's been a lot of up and down. Literally, it's been just sometimes you'll see a great throw from Jones, the over-the-shoulder one to Slayton on the corner route, and then you'll see, like, all the bad Daniel Jones throws, and it just makes you just put your face into your palms, basically, and it's just like, oh, I cannot believe we're paying this guy $40 million. But the throw today that Jones made, it was the play where, I'm sure a lot of you saw it on social media today, but it was bad. It was the play where Brian Burns was unblocked. It might have been Singletary's responsibility to pick him up, but just to ask Singletary to block Brian Burns with momentum coming his way is just a very tall task, literally. And then Jones, who would have been sacked in real life, it would have been, the play would have been over, whether it was a sack or a fumble. But then the play extends because it's practice, and Jones, like, throws this, I don't even know what it was. It reminded me, and I tweeted this, it reminded me of that video of Tim Tebow throwing that ball at Broncos practice probably 12 years ago, and the ball, like, slips out of his hands and just it looks all wobbly. Like, that's kind of what it looked like to a degree, and the ball almost got picked off by Kayvon Thibodeau. Like, it was just horrible. So I have not been that encouraged by Jones. We've seen some good throws, but, like, just one of the out routes today was a 5-yard out route. He threw it behind the guy, and just the play where he overthrew Wan'Dale Robinson a couple days ago, that was horrendous. There was one to Neighbors where he had everybody beat by a good 5 yards, and he underthrew him. He had to come back for it, and I think the pass got broken up. So it's like, shit like that is annoying. But I do know, like, Drew Lock behind him is not much better. So obviously I think, barring something very unforeseen, Daniel Jones will get the first crack at it. I don't expect Jones to last all season, whether it's due to injury or they just want to see what they have in Lock. Personally, I would like to see Lock and what he does here. It'd be ideal to see Jones play for half a year and then see Lock play for half a year and just kind of see what the difference is between the two guys. But it's probably not going to play out that perfectly, so I don't know. So we'll see how it goes. Preseason for the Giants starts on August 8th, a home game versus the Detroit Lions. So that's like 9 days away, basically. 9-10 days. Like, we're getting there. I think the Hall of Fame game's on Thursday, August 1st. I forget who's playing, but I think it's the Bears I saw because Caleb Williams is not playing, which is annoying, but I get it. So I might watch that, might not. It's always a boring game. But the Giants start August 8th. They have an August 17th at Houston. That's weird. At Houston, like they're going far. I mean, I feel like that's pretty. I don't know. Like, do they usually do that? I feel like why wouldn't you keep the games more local? Like, why would you travel all the way to Houston for a freaking preseason game? Like, why not? Why not play Baltimore? Why not play Philly? Why not play New England? Am I wrong? I don't know. I feel like it's just so unnecessary. And then they're at the Jets, as they always are, for the final week of preseason. So there's been no word, I think, about the Giants starting players and playing guys in the preseason. I'm sure they will to some degree. They did last year and the year before under this regime. I remember that game versus the Panthers. That was, I think, the second game, and they were home for that one. That was when Darren Waller had all those catches, and it was like, oh my God, Waller's going to be great. And then jackasses like me overdrafted him in fantasy football, and it didn't go too well. So, yeah, don't get fooled by preseason, guys. That's what I have to say for any fantasy advice. But anyway, that's going to do it for the video, for the Hard Knocks reactions. I will probably make a reaction after that Detroit Lions game. If something big comes up before that, which I don't know what that would be, but if something does, I will react to that as well. But of course, stay tuned, and hopefully it's a fun season. That's all I could ask for. I don't have high expectations in the win-loss column, but hopefully it's a fun season where we see Malik Neighbors have over 1,000 yards and look explosive and look as good as advertised, and we see Tyler Nubin make plays and have some interceptions and some pass breakups and plays in the box, and same thing for Andrew Phillips. So Theo Johnson catching some balls in the back of the end zone on a seam, just like that Larry Donnell play against the 49ers. I want to see stuff like that. Like, I want to see the young guys make plays. And speaking of young guys, the vibes around Evan Neal right now are not very good. I don't know what it is. I mean, obviously he's injured right now. He's on the PUP. But the vibes around that guy are just horrible. They signed Greg Van Roten today, who is, I want to look it up, I believe he's 34 years old. And he's had experience pretty much with a lot of teams. The Jets, the Raiders were last year. He started 17 games for the Raiders, played in 22 with Buffalo, so he did not overlap with Shane and Dable. That was their first year with the Giants. But yeah, Van Roten's started 71 games. A lot of guard experience, of course. So I don't know what their plan is exactly with the offensive line. We'll see how it shakes out. Illuminor's been at right tackle. He had an injury scare on day one, but he's fine, thank God, so that would have been a rough one. But yeah, Van Roten's 34. He's from New York, so hey, that's nice, but I'm not expecting the most. He played okay, I think, for Las Vegas last year, so it was an average year for him. But at this age and with that history, it's just like, what can you expect? So we'll see. They definitely have enough depth at the offensive line. I will say, it kind of reminds me of the Giants in 2021 when they really threw everything they could at the offensive line depth, and they signed like Matt Skura, and they traded for Billy Price, which was horrible in hindsight. But maybe it's not that bad, of course. Like, I'm not trying to make an exact connection, but like I just feel like that year they had a lot of depth and a lot of names, and they were just throwing shit at the wall and seeing what would stick. They brought in that Zach Fulton guy from the Texans who retired in preseason. And then the Joe Judge being too hard on his players thing has started coming out. So right now the offensive line depth is Andrew Thomas, Aaron Stinney, Jalen Mayfield's on this roster. Wow, Jalen Mayfield out of Michigan, I think he was. Yeah, he went to the Falcons and was horrible. I remember, I know people give PFF a lot of shit. This was back when Mike Renner and Austin Gale still had their podcast going. They were very much against Jalen Mayfield. They were going as far as to say this guy probably shouldn't be taken until day 3. And the Falcons took him in round 3. The guy was terrible. It's a PFFW. I feel like PFF, they don't get a lot of shout outs in a good way. So I'll do that. I used to listen to those guys a lot for draft content. And I remember they were so against Jalen Mayfield. I forgot he was on this roster. Greg Van Roten's there. John Runyon at right guard as well. Of course, JMS at center. And JMS, there's this shoulder injury that he dealt with last year. Today from Dan Duggan, John Michael Schmitz remains sidelined by a shoulder injury. Said it's the same shoulder as last season, but a different deal. so take that for what you will. I don't know. It's just not what you want to see. A shoulder injury for a center. I don't know if it's the arm he uses to snap the ball, or I don't know. It's just not what you want to see for a young guy. And I had a lot of faith in John Michael Schmitz. I really thought he'd be a safe pick, but it just goes to show, don't do the safe pick thing. Nobody's safe in this league. Nobody. Like, really, no one's safe in this league. To make another fantasy football comparison, I had the first overall pick in my 2022 fantasy football draft. And that was the year where McCaffrey was still a Panther, and he got traded mid-season. He was coming off back-to-back years of injuries, but everybody knew on a game-per-game or a game-by-game basis that Christian McCaffrey was far and away the best fantasy football player. But me, being the that I am, hopefully I didn't say that out loud, but I was like, oh, I'm going to take the safe pick and go with Jonathan Taylor. And then what do you know? He got hurt in week 1. So the point is, nobody is safe. Go for the talent. That's it. I mean, I'm making a lot of fantasy comparisons. I'm getting like that fantasy football mood. Definitely going to have my fantasy football video at some point in August. I try to release it after my draft, though, because I know a lot of my friends watch my videos, and I'm not trying to give out the advice before the draft. So anyway, right tackle, Jermaine Illuminor. Evan Neal's there as well. And I just don't know what to expect from Evan Neal. I really had a lot of high hopes. Another guy, Evan Neal, that I thought would be a pretty safe pick. The footwork was always an issue. Like, the speed rushers could beat him to the edge. I kind of figured that out of college. But I did not think he'd be this bad, especially by year 3. So I hope he proves me wrong, but the vibes are not very good right now for Evan Neal, especially for a guy taken that high in the draft. So we'll see how it plays out. But anyway, hope you guys enjoyed the video, the reaction, the fantasy connections, all those things. And I'll talk to you guys next time.